This week on Feeling My Oats, we are discussing the concepts of property and ownership, its relationship with both nationalism and immigrants, and the socialization of property in childhood games. Enjoy the show, facts!
Welcome back to
Feeling My Oats.
This is, of course, our weekly chat show where we kiki about our lives, catch up on politics, and have a fun, flirtatious, faggy, good old time. And did I say faggy?
Yes, you did.
Oh! There's a lot of contention with that word in particular. We've discussed that too in past episodes, but
Yeah.
a lot of people don't like it. I, for one, don't give a fuck, and I love it.
Same.
But we are your hosts,
Jeff Dunaway.
and Jojo.
And before we go into our episode, we just want to give a quick note of gratitude to people that have been tuning in and showing so much love and support to the channel. Special shout out to Dylan. Hey Dylan, Gabe,
girl.
Kelsey, Tao, and Kendra. Do you have
Hey,
any?
girlies.
Do you have anyone that you want to give?
No,
a
I don't
special
have
shout out?
friends, so
That's why.
that's why.
That explains. We want to encourage you to follow us on Instagram at Feeling My Oats Pod, Twitter at Feeling My Oats PD, and our YouTube channel that we just launched like a week ago. You can also catch up on our previous episodes on Spotify or iTunes. If you have any deepest, shadiest questions or stories, feel free to email us at feelingmyoatspod@gmail.com. We also have a Patreon if you want to check out our exclusive content and members-only early access to our podcast. Jojo, what's the situation with your Twitch account? How's it going?
It's actually working out in my favor, finally. The gods have granted me the equipment I need.
By gods, you mean?
I mean my brother. Yeah, I have all of the equipment I need to start my Twitch account. Except a microphone at this point. But I'll figure that out.
Right.
And I will keep you all updated on our socials. So the schedule will be updated.
Sweet.
But I'm starting a full-time position next week.
Double
We
snaps.
love that. Finally.
That's great.
So the schedule is still up for debate at this point. I'm not too sure what I want to do yet.
Right.
But yeah.
Have you decided on a name for the...
Yeah, I'm actually extending this podcast, or the name for this podcast, Feeling My Oats, on my Twitch account.
Sweet.
So you can access me on Twitch at Feeling My Oats.
I also have a Twitch account. It's under my eyelids. Every morning I wake up and I twitch a little.
Twitch a lot. Twitchy, twitchy, twitch.
That sounds so exciting. I'm so excited for you.
I'm really excited, actually.
I feel like there's a great community there already. So, like, you already know so much about Twitch and the people there already.
Yeah, because I already follow other people and I watch their content every once in a while.
Right.
Actually, while I've been playing games on my new computer, I have the other side of the computer, another monitor, just with Twitch playing in the background. So I have multiple things going on at once. So
I love a multitasking queen.
she is
Come through multitasking.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Th-
But that concludes me. Jeff, what about your writing? What's going on there?
I've been hitting a slump, a creative slump.
You look like a slump.
Yeah, it's under my armpits. But I've been jotting ideas around camp. And I mean, I'm writing about the concept of camp.
Oh, I thought I was thinking about camping.
Camping.
Have you ever been camping?
No. I camp all my life.
You're too gay for that.
Yeah. But I did write about camp and mapping out some of my personal stories and also like how I learned about camp. I wrote about our night out at Suba. There was one night, do you remember? We went out. It was like fucking years ago.
Yeah, but you said you didn't give me much context because we've gone to Supa many times.
So there was one night that we went out and then we were outside the bar per usual.
Yeah.
That's where the
That
smokers
was my
are.
smoking days. I've never stepped foot in a fucking bar when I was smoking. So
There was one night that you were singing like Whitney Houston.
I did not sing Whitney Houston.
You did sing Whitney Houston.
What song?
Something like I Want to Dance with Somebody. I do not want to dance with somebody.
I do not wish to comment.
But there was
I do not want to comment.
There you go.
There we go. You were singing Whitney, and then other people around were joining us. Do you remember?
Oh, yeah, I do.
I think that was I thought about that memory, not frequently, but like I think of like, what really captures like campiness or like the.
Is that camp though? I think that was just joy.
The Joy Behars.
Yeah, it was the Joy Behar of the Century Mama.
Yeah. But that was I was trying to capture a feeling of like what, like how does that relate to like
how camp is so infectious. And,
yeah.
And it's accidental.
Yes. Yeah. I think that
for the most part, like
yeah.
Camp is it's not always deliberate.
Yeah. It's failed seriousness.
Yeah.
So in the essay. But anyway, back to the writing. I wrote a little bit like a longer piece. Try to ask some more questions about camp, because like when we think about camp, it's like more docile. It seems like it has no political aspiration. So I really want to dig a little bit deeper and
find the politicization behind camp, because it honestly is. I think it's also an inherent queer aesthetic.
Yeah, truly. Yeah,
it truly is.
Yeah.
I mean, you ask a straight person down the street, "Hey, what's your comment on camp?" And they're like, "I love fishing."
I mean, that's actually pretty camp. That's straight camp to me. Like the idea of a straight man enjoy fishing so much that
it becomes camp.
Like
just by default.
Like from the queer perspective, like everything is straight man.
Oh my god, anything a straight person does, I'm just like perplexed, completely lost, confused.
Yeah, so I really I had a great time writing this, so I encourage people to check it out and leave a comment if you want. And yeah, so back to our podcast. It's called Feeling My Oats. I want to ask Jojo, like, what's making you feel your oats or not feel your oats this week?
That's a good question, Jeffy, because I want to get real right now in the pod. There's this issue that's been going on that's been getting on my nerves for over a week now, and at this point we've all heard about it. It's the Freedom Convoy. And we all likely know someone who supports it, which adds another layer of frustration on my part, but
right.
We all know that it's a protest organized by a bunch of white truckers who are protesting the vaccine mandates and the lockdowns, etc. And I did see not too long ago that the statistics pointed out that 90%, around 90%, roughly 90% of truckers involved in the Freedom Convoy are actually vaccinated, which is strange.
Right.
And others, as it's been progressing into the capital, Ottawa, we've seen a surge of others joining in from across the province or across the country, actually.
Right.
So it's all about privilege and who gets to make a big fuss about the mandates and the state's grasp on the public, which I agree with that, at least.
Right.
But it's this underlying issue that I will get to in a bit, but it has nothing to do with unity specifically, too.
Right.
It's all about unifying white nationalists.
Right. It's unifying a certain kind of like unification or like just assembling whiteness in general.
Yeah, assembling whiteness. Yeah.
Yeah. I totally see
white
that.
nationalists, and it's a larger issue about that, not so much the actual mandates.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that a little further in the pod, but I just kind of want to establish that it's extremely violent and harmful towards Black, Indigenous, and disabled communities, and it also negates the work of like healthcare practitioners,
right?
Healthcare workers that have been sacrificing their lives in the hospitals,
right?
Right.
I think it's polarizing because like on one hand, you see like people of color supporting the convoy. There's a page specifically dedicated towards like people of color supporting the convoy, right? And while at the same time there are people appropriating Indigenous cultures in the rallies, like through like dancing or music or whatever, like you see like there are more layers to it, like in terms of like how racialized people or indigenous people like participation in it, or like how they want to assimilate into the national perspective or the
The
narrative.
national rhetoric.
Yeah.
It's like a broader conversation about inclusion in that sense.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, totally.
Inclusion within a national fabric of like what constitutes Canada.
Right. I think like when I looked at it, I feel people, left or right identified people, they're holding on to symbologies, symbols in general.
Symbolism, yeah.
Yeah, I think they are trying to channel some of that frustrations and grabbing onto whatever symbol that is most convenient to them, and then make them feel like they're part of something.
And I think that actually ties in with the unifying aspect behind it.
Right.
So you have these people who are participating in the convoy and they're like, this is about unity.
But they don't give a shit about you.
They don't give a shit about you. Girl, you in danger, girl.
You're not gonna call me. I'm gonna call you.
I'm gonna call my lawyer.
So there's even like information about people getting the 9 million from the GoFundMe and going MIA. Like
it's going nowhere.
it's going nowhere. And there's like further like discussion about where's this funding actually going.
Yeah.
Like, is it actually funding outright movement in Canada? Is it like a bad sign?
Oh, it probably
which is super dangerous if you really think about it.
Uh-huh.
Like, I mean, from my perspective as an immigrant here, I think a lot of Canadians are content with the idea of like Canada isn't that bad. Like,
yeah,
we shouldn't be afraid. Like, this is not Canadian, but this is perfectly Canadian. This is problematic in a lot of ways.
And I've seen critiques from like an American context, and they all say like this is like a microcosm of like an American issue.
Right.
And I've been saying that along with like some of our other friends. We've had conversations about this. Canada is just a smaller, more condensed version of America.
It's a more sanitized version of
sanitized. Yeah. That's a good way of. That's an apt way of putting it.
Right.
It's just Canada is just an extension of that. Whatever's happening in the States. And then we get the aftermath of whatever happens in America will eventually happen here.
Right.
If not a year later, which in a way, this convoy is just a mimicry of the insurrection from last year.
Yeah, totally.
And that's just a year later.
Exactly.
So we see that happening, and the whole convoy thing too is about freedom.
Right.
There's a reason why it's called the Freedom Convoy.
Right.
Which brings up in my head, what the fuck does that even mean?
Right. I think back to what I was saying earlier about symbol, right? I think people who are participating in the convoy think of freedom as also an empty symbol. And like, what is it actually? When you ask them like, how do they define freedom, or like how do they associate with it? Like, I assume that they probably give you a more about, oh, it's my right, like I can do whatever I want. But like, it's actually more complex than that. I think people, rather than jumping into the symbol of freedom, like there's so much more layers, and and think of our individual personhood as part of a bigger collective, right? Especially in Asia, where people in Asia have so much shame about like how am I affecting the collective, and it long before COVID, right? We started wearing masks like as a cultural practice in general, like because I think inherently there's so much shame about like, am I bringing everybody down? Am I bringing harm to everybody? And there's so much shame about like.
And the short answer is yes.
Yeah, totally.
From your perspective,
That's the tea. But anyway, what's your take on like the like in terms of the Canadian perspective on freedom? Like how, like, do you think that freedom is being weaponized as a trope? Like,
oh, for sure, and we are seeing that right now. But going back to what you were just saying in terms of like the collective and freedom, I was just thinking, if you ask a random person who's attending the protest, they would give you a different answer from the people who organized it. Right?
That's interesting.
So freedom for the everyday person who is just joining into this protest would give you probably something like, this is about unity, this is about whatever, right? What we've already discussed. But if you asked the actual person who organized this, who has been identified as an alt-right, like
white nationalist,
Islamophobic, homophobic, etc., he would tell you freedom is to juxtapose all of these other, all of these liberal ideologies, basically.
Being xenophobic, basically.
Just to put that into perspective, I think freedom is a fallacy in this instance.
Right.
Honestly.
Right.
And it's the same under any kind of nationalist rhetoric, really.
Right.
America, Canada, etc. Especially like from the settler state. Right.
Right. I think that makes up the whole fabric of it because
it's about settlement.
Yeah.
And it's about maintaining the histories that were assigned to those settlements, which is white nationalism.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Right. I agree totally.
But I did post something actually on Instagram a few days ago and it got taken down.
What did you post?
It was an article from the Toronto Post, and there was an opinion piece written by an Indigenous woman, Joy Henderson.
Yeah, I've heard of her.
And the whole opinion piece kind of discussed the relations between Indigenous and Black people kind of combating the pipelines in Wet'suwet'en and being incarcerated by virtue of their implication with those particular protests.
Right.
So it was a whole opinion piece on how white nationalists get away with things.
Right.
So what I had written alongside that was, quote, when you disguise freedom within a nationalist approach, you're actively engaging with the settler colonial project. And I said, in other words, this Freedom Convoy movement is rooted in white nationalism and white supremacy. And not long after that, approximately an hour after it had been taken down. So I don't know who reported that, but...
Do you think someone reported that?
Probably.
Because I know that like different social medias have different like kinds of ways to quote unquote regulate content.
Regulate, yeah.
I mean, in the name of like censorship or freedom or whatever that means. But that brings up to the point, like I wanted like for every like social phenomenon, I think there are cracks and there are divides. Like when we think about
Say crack again.
Crack. I always say yes to crack.
Always.
My butt cracks. So but, I think every phenomenon or social event, there's also a divide and also there's a crack that we can find interesting ways to crack it open. Like crack it open. I love the word crack. And like I'm thinking about like what the divide is between the left and the right, and because I think different ideologies have their different digital patterns, right? Like especially our generation who are more left leaning, like we like to go on Instagram, we're on TikTok, like and share infographics of like random shit. We love that.
And then everyone else shares it, and then they think that's the extent of my activism.
It's like, that's enough activism for today,
Yeah.
sweetie. But it's further than that. And on the other side, you have the right-leaning, who's spreading misinformation, listening to Joe Rogan's podcast. And
Jordan Peterson.
and like, I'm thinking, is there even intermingling between the two? And like, how do we even go beyond that? Right?
Yeah. I mean, our conception of left is not so left. It's just a little left from the right.
Yeah, it's so in the middle, essentially.
Yeah. No, not even. There's probably still right-leaning, just...
Like, we like to pat ourselves in the back and saying, like, oh, we know who we are, or we think we know who we are. But actually, we are not. We're not even further than that. Like, when I'm thinking... like especially post BLM and the George Floyd movement, like have we actually gone further and like about our racial and like class reckoning? Like
no, not
what
at all.
like how do we even find a way to like navigate in a world not post BLM? We're still living in a BLM like movement.
Yeah.
And like how do we channel and use our platform better? Right.
Yeah.
Like beyond the digital world, right? Like how do we actually have real life things that we can invest in, right? I think that's the question I've been battling and also trying to think along.
That's a good question, though, because these issues manifest in different ways all the time.
Right.
And as much as these movements do happen, you see them dissipate, essentially.
Yeah, totally.
Because people just stop engaging with them and stop caring. Exactly.
Yeah.
But at the same time, though, we live in a system that forces us to just labor all the time. So you just don't have time to do anything.
Yeah. Which is...
It's fucking sad.
Capitalist.
Yeah, it's it's back to one of the biggest evils. I mean, white supremacy and capitalism.
Right.
Two of the biggest evils.
The way that our lives are structured right now, it's heavily shaped by capitalism.
Yeah.
Like the whole concept of a 9-to-5 and a 40-hour work week.
Yeah.
Really limits how we can leverage our
political stances and our politicization as just beings.
Right. But I don't mean to deter anybody from looking into our community resources that are close to us. I want to bring out some of the 3 resources that we can check it out. So I think this has always been my kind of motto. I think the personal is the political. Yeah. And I think our personal feelings are real, but we need to find a way to ground those conversations in real life community projects.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Such as Water for Canadians, which is a great counter fundraising for
against the convoy.
Yeah, water access for Indigenous people, and just for Canadians, quote unquote Canadians all across the land, I guess. We're also advocating for defunding the police and relocating some of the resources.
Of course, that's been happening for a year and a half now, and we haven't seen much success, not here at least, but other parts, sure.
Yeah. I think some of the places in the world are doing this, and if they are leading some of the changes, I mean, if you think about Hamilton is a less progressive, or what about other places that are more progressive in the work they're starting to do?
Yeah, there were a bunch of places in the States, a lot of cities that were reallocating funds to other community initiatives and, to actually help people in their communities.
Yeah, I think that has shown positive results, and if we can advocate for that, I think the world will be on a righter track or the better track.
And reparations, just pay reparations, girls.
If you want to do reparations on the podcast, feel free to send some money my way, bitch.
Going further with that, though, I think it's also important to just give the money directly to the people.
Yeah.
You don't have to donate the money to a BLM. Charity.
Oh, God. The BLM in Toronto.
I heard all that. Yeah.
Oh, no, it is too much.
Team too much. We're not going there.
Thank you.
Just thank you. Just give the money to someone in your life that needs it.
Right. It can be a simple gesture. It doesn't really have to be money. It can be I don't know, just
if they need help with anything, mostly money. Just give the money directly.
Just give them money.
Avoid all that shit. It's not even worth it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people just donate to charity for clout anyways. They're I just want to see my name on there and that's enough activism.
I know who you're talking about.
Next.
But before we go into our episode, we are going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. So we're moving on to our segment called What's an Adjective?
What is it?
What's an adjective?
Mm-hmm.
This is our adjective where we hit our random adjective generator to prompt the first thing that comes to mind. We want to spill the beans and tell the juicy stories.
The stories.
Okay, so without further ado, let's see what adjective we got.
Yeah, Jeff, let's see.
Hit it!
I will. Oh,
gonna kill
alcoholic.
Girl. Do you want to take this or?
It's yours.
I've always tried to not drink. So growing up in Asia, you just weren't shown or taught to drink. First of all, it costs a lot of fucking money. Second of all, it's not fun. You don't want to drink in front of your family because you're gonna get fucking.
You're gonna get shamed.
You're gonna get shamed.
Yeah.
Why am I talking about Asia with so much shame? I don't think that is the one thing that But
No,
I think
it's because you left Asia and you brought all that shame with you here.
and I want
And
to
now
douche
I
it
feel
out.
ashamed for you.
It's infectious. But back to alcohol. Like, the most that I've drank is when during the pandemic. Like I had like a $30 budget for a week. Is that too
drink?
much? Yeah, is that too much?
Girl, what? A week?
A week. So it's like probably like a bottle of wine and a few drinks.
That's a lot for a week. I mean, you do you, girl.
There's so much shame about not being addicted to any kind of consumption growing up, and I'm so aware and hyper aware sometimes of my consumption, whether it is like drugs.
You also point out everyone else's consumption too. But I mean, you're also from another place coming into one of the fucking countries that consumes the most.
so much alcohol. Are
Not
you
just
fucking
alcohol, everything.
Weed, there's someone that I'm thinking about. Weed, coke, drinking, like so much is going on. It's like euphoria in real life. It's actually crazy. So when I'm thinking about, there's not a chance in hell I'm gonna become an alcoholic. There's because the scale is way too big. Like I'm comparing myself to a Canadian. Are you joking me? I drink like
Not even just a Canadian, a white person.
That's shade. What if I've heard stories about what if your partner is an alcoholic? Like how do you even navigate? I'm thinking, like, as someone who doesn't have a lot of experience in drinking, like how.
Well, one of my exes was an alcoholic, and I'm not going to get into the details. But it wasn't very nice.
Let's just say that.
Let's just say that. And let's move on because that's
We should just
enough.
drink some tea.
Yeah.
I'm drinking citrus lemon.
And I'm drinking ginger lemon.
It purges my skin, so I feel great. Red wine could never.
Could never.
Do you want to hit your adjective?
Yeah, let's do it.
You should say to hit it.
Ooh. I got vulgar.
Why
does it reading us today? Why is this generator? What is happening?
Vulgar. Well, how much time do we have?
I am very vulgar. I feel like it's an apt way for me to get something across. To get my point across.
In the workplace?
In the workplace. I got to a point, too, where I just stopped caring and stopped filtering what I say because, I mean...
We've been taught to
Yeah,
filter
in academia, we've been taught to filter ourselves and to filter our language, and I'm not going to let that happen.
Yeah.
I'm going to let my, like, working class background just, like, guide me through life.
Yeah.
Because there's no point. There's no point. I'm fucking happy.
Yeah.
No, I'm not. I'm just going to take that and run with it because that's just who I am as a person as well. I don't care about the rules necessarily, and
like vulgar. I think people think how gay people talk are vulgar.
Yeah, I love your accent, you fucking whore.
Like that is a very sweet and creatively crafted compliment. That's 3 C's. Yeah. Creatively crafted compliment.
That's just who we are as like a community though. We just like lash out on each other, but it's like out of love.
Or hate.
Yeah.
Usually.
No, I don't hate everyone. Like I'll call you a bitch and a cunt.
Oh, a cum dump.
A cum dump. A septic tank.
Or just Jeff.
Or I don't call you at all.
I think from the marginalized perspective, like language has been the way that we can channel ourselves, like unapologetically. Mm-hmm. And I think like people wanted to be nice. That is so trivialized. Like, how about you earn it? How about you? Like, I mean it.
Earn it by giving me money.
Shout out to what we said earlier. But like, just you have to earn it, right? I'm just not gonna show up with you, like show up and be nice with you and play fucking.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Kitchen with you. I don't know.
Kitchen. Like I don't even like the kitchen.
I don't even know her.
Who is she?
But do you have any more final words on vulgar?
No, I just love it. That's it.
Word.
That's the pod.
This wraps up our segment called What's an Adjective?
What's an adjective?
I still don't know what it is.
What is a super adjective? Fat.
Delete it, fat.
Delete it, fat. Should we take a break?
Yeah, let's take a break.
And we'll be right back and talk about property. And we're back.
Yes, we are. So, we begin our segment on the topic of property. Why did we choose that? Well, I pushed for it myself.
Yes. You love to push.
I love to push buttons. But I think I wanted to discuss this topic specifically because it's so central to our lives right now. I think the pandemic also illuminated a lot of the problems that we've kind of been dealing with as a collective. And so I wanted to explore this topic a little deeper and kind of look at the history behind it and its relation to not only the state, but how we interact with property in our day-to-day lives, basically.
And we're not talking about property as in a house.
I mean property as in land, property as in the material objects that you possess. Property in like an amalgamation of like different ways. Right. Because they manifest in our lives.
In almost all aspects of our society.
Yeah.
It has legal ways of like thinking about
legal
property.
Implications for sure.
Right. And like intellectual property and how we can how content is being seen as a property.
Oh yeah.
In the creative arts, I mean specifically.
This pod is our intellectual property, is it not?
Yeah. Yes. Stupid property.
Our stupid indulgent property.
Stupid. I when I'm thinking about property, I'm thinking about there's like you said, like a broader history.
Yeah.
And who gets to be involved in the process of defining what is property.
Yeah.
And like because when we think about property, there's we're describing a relationship, right? Mm-hmm. There's someone who is owning something.
Yeah.
Or owned by multiple people.
Who owns the means of production or etc.
Yeah, totally. So like property in like from our understanding, it's a broader conversation about like race, gender, class. It's like the multiple layers that are like converging all together into what we commonly think of as property right now.
Yeah.
So we wanted to dig a little bit deeper.
When I think of property as a kind of possession, like I said earlier.
Yeah.
Something needing to be conquered and then commodified under a deliberate form of economic and specifically like capitalist exploitation. So there's also like a language behind this that kind of defines what property is, right? Mm-hmm. Property, like we said already, is about possession.
Yeah.
So we have the language that kind of shapes how we cultivate our relationships with what we own and others as well.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
So it's a collective, and we have this collective understanding of what constitutes property in the West. And we see that kind of evolving out of American kind of rhetoric, basically, or American, the Americanization of like what constitutes property in general.
Yeah, totally. I think it goes back to like some of the conversation we had in the beginning of the episode where we talk about the convoy. I mean, the event itself can also be understood from the perspective of the property.
Yeah.
Which we'll talk about a little bit more further as we go on.
So before we jump into our conversation on property further, we actually have a few books here that we've collectively read that discuss the issues of property and possession a little further. And so our task here, we were assigned a book each, and we had to, read.
Because reading is what?
Fundamental.
Not for everybody.
Not for everyone. And Jeff actually was assigned the book On Property by Ronaldo Walcott, which is actually
amazing,
fairly new.
Yeah, it's really comprehensive. It's written not long after the George Floyd incident.
Yeah, just late last year.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And it's like a pretty condensed and rich and informative of like charting some of the concept of property and how it has a longer history of like slavery
attached to it.
Yeah, totally. The book basically explores the long shadows of slavery's afterlife and shows how the present-day abolitionists continue to advocate for an imaginative and creative philosophy that ensures freedom and equality for all. So the excerpt that I chose specifically reads something like this. It was not just the one was enslaved, it was also the one could not own oneself and one's offspring, and therefore could not lay claim to family. So in both theory and practice, this means that black enslaved person literally had no autonomy or control over either their body or biological kin.
Yeah.
The child followed the condition of the mother and thereby became at birth with white master's property. This fact has informed black people's relationship to property.
Yeah, definitely. And even black folks now who have Anglo-Saxon names.
Right.
So I'm thinking about like names that are handed down to black people from their white slave masters, and how that like claims, those are claims, like those names in general are claims to individual people as property.
Right.
And we see that happening, and we've seen that happen, and those legacies are still attached to those particular groups of people.
Right. I think like this particular excerpt jumps to me is like how property is relationship with family.
Yeah.
And we see a lot of, I mean, it also really succinctly charts out how the concept of property has relation with the prison, like incarceration, and etc. Right? Like I'm thinking about a recent movie I've watched, If Beale Street Could Talk. It's a movie adaptation from James Baldwin's novel.
Yeah.
It's exactly like talking about the idea. So the plot goes something along the line of a black man in the 60s was wrongly accused of an assault.
Yeah.
And he was sent to jail, sent to prison. And it's basically exploring how the family manages to like come together and finding ways to like.
That sounds a lot like the Emmett Till trial.
I think it's all part of history. It's all patterns, right? And I think it just goes to like talking about how the concept of slave like how histories of slavery has a lot of ties with like the concept of property, and how like the society has find ways to control those things.
Yeah, it manifests in like meticulous ways.
Yeah,
which is kind of what I'm going to talk about in terms of the book that I have here. And whatever you've said actually makes a lot of sense because I've seen similar arguments from indigenous critiques on settler colonialism and its relationship to land. So whereas you talked about individual bodies as property, I'm going to talk about land.
Sweet. What is the book that you've chosen?
I chose the book The White Possessive, Property, Power, and Indigenous Sovereignty by Aileen Morton Robinson. And she specifically derives from Australia. So we see those critiques and how they are globalized, essentially.
Yeah.
They are universal.
Right.
And in this book, she says, and this is very short, whiteness is a form of property in law. And you might be thinking, what the fuck does that mean? Right? But to simplify, this means that whiteness not only informs the foundation of what constitutes property in the settler state, but also suggests that whiteness as a category of racialization is a form of property on its own. Right? And she argues further that, quote, as a form of property, whiteness accumulates capital and social appreciation as what people are recognized within the law primarily as property-owning subjects. So the ubiquitous presence of whiteness in everything, especially the law in particular, serves to constantly legitimize the occupation of stolen indigenous land. And in the case of Walcott, the enslavement of black people.
Right.
So the process of identifying land within a settler colonial concept of property in its own right continues to replicate colonial violence and theft. And we see that happening. Right now.
Right.
So these two books are obviously similar in many ways, and specifically their criticism of Western concepts of property, and I think they are essential.
Right. And it goes back to like how like social systems like the police, which we hate, like how they kind of evaluate like racial biases.
Yeah.
And like how
they don't.
They don't. Like how like where's that like racial biases coming from? Like within the police.
Oh, it's structurally, like, it's a structural foundation.
Right.
I mean, if you think about the use of police during the slave trades and chattel slavery, they were used to police slaves, right?
Right. And they thought the model worked quote unquote so well, they decided to bring it on.
I don't think it was as intentional as that. I think it was just a process of mutation. It mutated into something a little more structurally aware.
Right.
And I think that it's important to note, too, that the police are so quick to incarcerate Indigenous and Black people for protesting, regardless of the situation. But they're not so, emboldened by the white truckers storming the Capitol.
Right.
And I think we're actually seeing the law work specifically as it was intended. When the law is written by white people, it's surely only going to benefit and protect other white people, right?
Right.
And I think in terms of like the Freedom Convoy itself, we are also seeing and witnessing whiteness reclaiming the state as its own property.
Interesting.
Right.
I think like what drew me to it, to talking about like property and also like the recent convoy development, is like how the media has like a racial preference in framing like white protesters are like fighting the language of, right, like there are like white terrorists I'm talking about in America, they always use like a perfect picture if they're being arrested
in a suit
and like they're great students, and like you have like black vets in America who are like
it's their mugshot
and they're not reported objectively, or I'm saying that there's no objective like reporting, but like the way these narratives are being told are totally different, and I think that a lot of it has to do with like racial biases,
and not even just racial biases, but these reporters and these places that report on the law are affiliated with the state
right.
and the law.
Right.
So of course there's always going to be a bias.
Right.
So what do we do with that?
I'm thinking.
I mean, we don't have the answers, and
I think this is so the way that we're doing the podcast, we of course want to like talk about
these issues, but we don't have the answers. We're just two faggy fucks, just like
talking
navigating life, talking shit,
right.
trying to figure out what the fuck's happening, not only in our lives but the lives of others, because we do care about everyone and everything.
If you were just listening to the episode on the treadmill, why is it the first thing that come with it?
Because you hate fat people. Let's just say it.
Whether you're listening to when you're on the way to work, I think our way to the reason why we're producing the podcast is primarily to have a conversation and also articulate those things.
And to have people just think about it.
Yeah, if we can bring in some like knowledge or some thinking threads to your life, I think that's all that we kind of
if you can rethink your position in the world, I mean, that's what we do.
Right.
And coming from like myself, an academic background where teaching was one of my favorite things about the fucking job. I felt a lot of reward when I got a complicated theory or a complicated thought across to my students.
Or a complicated student.
Across from my thoughts.
like back to what I'm saying about like little cracks and valleys in like the social phenomenon. Like how are we able to find the little creative ways to like hack into a more politicized and more radical way of living?
Yeah.
Like for example, if like a teacher, right? Like are there any kind of room that you can wiggle your own teachings or like your way of...
Bitch, I try to do that all the time. I'm doing it here.
Like, I mean, think of your work. Like, if our current lives are so framed by the 40-hour work week, like, are we able to find creative ways to sneak in to leverage some of that radical and political work that we want to be doing in our lives?
And this is it.
Yeah.
This is what we are, hoping to do.
Yeah. And should we take a break?
Yeah, let's take a break.
And we'll be right back to talk more about property. And we are back, gorgeous.
Yes, gorgeous.
We want to switch gears and return to our respective lives and to extend our conversations about how property has any kind of like relationship with our lives. Yeah. What do you want to say to Gemma?
I would pretty much let Gemma know. No. When I think of property, I can't help but think about how fixated we are with just owning things in general and how that manifests through a process of socialization that comes with its own set of conditions, right?
Right.
So, Jeff, what kinds of differences have you noticed between here and Hong Kong in terms of property and even the mentality surrounding property? Like, can you give an example of something that changed your thinking about property in the past or even recently?
Right. I can do a little comparison between Hong Kong and here in Canada, for example.
We love that.
I think going back to what you were talking about, the white possessive excerpt, I think when there's a land, it's almost like a canvas for migration and also competition, right?
Yeah.
And how much of the land kind of like shapes like how competitive the market is and like how people interact with that market, right? So when I'm thinking about Hong Kong, 70% of the land is mountains. So my life in Hong Kong was hearing so many sounds drilling, like
Drilling into the rock.
Yep, and just like rock pounding or whatever constructive.
I don't think you're thinking about rocks anymore.
Yeah, I'm thinking about I'm having a hungry stomach. That's me.
I don't think that was hunger either.
But like I grew up just constantly surrounded by constructions and watching these high-rises buildings like suddenly erecting. Oh my god, sexual language.
She's just doing this.
And like I think about how like Hong Kong people have a obsession with finding a house. They have to go into a good college. They have to find a partner. They have to get a house. And when I'm growing up, I just notice how the flats are getting smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yeah, everything's getting condensed.
And more expensive. Like people are betting their whole lives, paying their mortgage to get a apartment of a shoebox.
Yeah.
And I think they're culturally taught to do this. It's like a script for mostly straight people to go through that phase and then just like marrying someone,
having children.
And I think that's their understanding of what a good life means. Whereas I am the like I said, like an example of crack, like finding a way through the crack
of resistance.
Of resistance. I'm coming here to Canada. The land is bigger. There's a bigger canvas here, and everything is below 4 stories mostly. We're from the city where we are right now, and I feel like people are more relaxed about housing. I mean, we're also speaking from a place of privilege, and
yeah, there's also a housing crisis here too,
right? Which is really real and also happening in real life. But like I suddenly feel like my relationship with owning it's more relaxed, and I don't really have to follow the script of like, oh, I'm gonna get a house, I'm gonna find a way and have a good life.
All connects to what you said earlier about how hyper aware you are about consumption.
Yeah, totally. Like how it's so arbitrary and like it takes so much to own something. And you really think about like why would I even do that? Like why would I even, because my citizenship is so like precarious and so like malleable. Like why would I tie my whole identity in my life to a place, not just like an apartment but also a nation in general speaking? Which is I think that's like my whole spiel about my comparison between Hong Kong and here.
And then there's like also an inherent shame that comes with renting, right, in Hong Kong, which is like the same here. Like, what you've been describing is literally the same as here.
Right. Why do you think there's so much shame about renting? Which I think is so ridiculous. Like,
because we've developed this fixation as like a society on the accumulation of wealth and like purchasing things and trying to reap the benefits from those purchases, right?
Right.
And renting in general is just not favorable. Some people pay more renting apartments than they would on a fucking mortgage.
Right.
But because the banks won't allow a mortgage, they have to rent. So it's a signifier of like someone's poverty or even their inability to make enough money to purchase.
I mean, it goes back to our conversation about banks. Like they have a mortgage system that is rigged.
Oh, yeah.
To hetero people, to people who are coupled, who are people, like, they get a better rate or however that works for them. Yeah. And, like, it just shows how, like like the whole society has a logic of property that is so ingrained in like almost every aspect of our lives.
Of our lives, exactly.
Like, how about you? Like, what do you think about when you think about property? I know.
Well, this is gonna sound very weird, but I just thought about this, but owning animals.
Interesting.
So weird, right?
Interesting.
In terms of like this conversation on property, like I have a cat back home. She's my property. I must take care of her. I must feed her. I must change her litter box. I must brush her. I must brush her teeth. I bring her to the vet if I have to. Not a lot, but if I have to, I will. She is my property. It's like I have this Western idea of like what property is, and I'm like, I own a fucking cat.
I feel like for a cat, from a cat's perspective, I feel like she owns you.
Yeah, she owns me. But she's also like very lucky. Like these animals are lucky to have us because they would otherwise die. They wouldn't live fulfilled long lives like they are, right?
Right.
If they were in the wild. But it's weird. I just thought about this. It was just an epiphany I had that we just own animals.
Do you think it's a codependent relationship? Like, what is she giving you anything in return? Like,
girl, is she?
She's bringing you debt, honey.
No, I love my cat. I love her so much. I think she's so cute, and she speaks to me, and literally she will meow at me. She
speaks unspeakable things into my ear.
Yeah, she meows at me. She grooms me by licking my skin. She's constantly seeking attention, and I love that. Since I live alone, it's great company, but I own her. It's very weird.
It's not like you're it's not like you're a bad owner or anything.
No.
I mean, you're doing a perfect job for being a pet owner. Like
specifically cats too. Like I know some people who don't even clean their cats' litter boxes. Like they'll let it go for days upon days, and I'm like, that's fucking sick. That's gross.
Never
clean your box.
Clean your box.
Clean your box and clean your cat's box, okay? But that's just me going on a tangent there, but which was not even on the script, mind you.
Love that.
But we were thinking in terms of the socialization of property and ownership in like our everyday lives, and what that means in terms of like children and how that shapes children into thinking at such a young age that I should aspire to own property or to own land, basically.
Right.
And we were thinking board games and video games and how that kind of helps shape those mentalities and how those games in particular are designed to leave long-standing impressions on kids, right?
Right. Back to what I was saying, like the land, right? I think board games have a trend or like a model of like treating the land as like a canvas and trying to gamify it.
Yeah. And
trying to force players to compete for resources and like build things up and like try to compete
to adopt a competitive model.
Right. And like for example, like Monopoly. We want to talk about Monopoly.
First thing that comes to mind. Oh yeah.
Do you know people play Monopoly competitively?
I wouldn't doubt it.
That's
you can play anything.
The driest thing one can play. Like, why would you do that? First of all,
do you like torture?
Do you like owning land?
Yes, I do. Don't mind if I do.
My nipples get hard whenever I go past the goal
and collect 200. Yes.
I'm like, only 200. That's
only 200.
When was the last time you played the game? Do you remember?
Fuck. Years ago.
Yeah.
I remember when I was in high school, I think there was a SpongeBob edition of Monopoly that came out, and I think it was only like $10 at the time. It was on sale, so I went and bought it because it was much cheaper than the original version.
Right. From the Value Village.
From the Value Village. The VV Boutique.
Value Village of Dolls.
Yeah. When did you last play it?
I played it probably with my cousins during Chinese New Year. It's like a weird ritual that we all decided to stick to.
To own land?
And we were just like, fuck, are we doing this again and again?
Again?
Fucking again. It's so dry. Like I hate the idea of like a circle. We have to run around a circle. Like what?
Would you prefer the game of life, Mama, where it's
Just one way road, baby. No return.
No return.
But I think it's really dry and it doesn't really inform us anything.
Yeah.
It only informs us like the socialization of like owning shit and also like mostly punishing people for
for landing on your face.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not even going in, bitch. I'm just walking by and
free
I gotta
parking.
pay you.
Free parking.
And I
It's
gotta
the
pay
only
you.
That's how fucked up like
I gotta pay you to cross the boardwalk
for taking a train. I would rather go to jail.
Honestly,
because like later in the game, if you want
you want to go to jail,
which is so crazy to me. If you go to jail, you don't need to run around the town and pay everybody rent. I'm like, what?
I think that's just like life, though. You avoid things. You go to jail. Damn. I mean, I think it also like criminalizes poor people.
Oh yeah, whoever gets to start the game first, they're gonna win.
Oh no, this is the strategy. You have to buy the most property at the beginning. And also statistically, I think the one corner around Park Place is the best corner for you to purchase.
Interesting.
Statistically. Though, so I think it's orange and yellow.
Red. Something.
Red,
and then yellow, and then green.
It's orange and red. Those are the ones you want to purchase.
No one ever lands on green, let me tell you. People always land on the pink, orange, and the yellow.
Yeah.
And the red.
So statistically, you want that corner. But
look at we. Look at us.
look at we.
Yeah, we want to dive a little deeper into the history of the game
because the history is very contentious and gaggy.
It's gagging.
It's gagina.
Good. Who? So cue the classical music. So 1903, a lovely lady called Lizzie McGee. She's a leftist abolitionist and actress. She designed the game during the financial boom in America during the turn of the century as people are getting richer. So she called this the Landlord Game, and she used this mostly as a teaching tool. She believed that the landlord's greed would be the nation's downfall. So she basically created a game and with an anti-capitalist message. So just to see how if someone hoards so much wealth while other people are losing so much of their money and properties. And the Landlord Game somehow transformed and passed around so many people and then ultimately came to what we know of now as the Monopoly.
And in the 1930s, the game mutated through different regional recreations, and the message turned around completely, 180. People start to glorify the idea of becoming rich, and more importantly, watching their friends and competitors, and I say competitors, go bankrupt and lose everything. And so this shift was actually brought by a man named Charles Darrow, who stole the concept upon playing it with one of his friends, included new rules, and released it as Monopoly. Parker Brothers then bought the rights from Darrow, and then bought the rights from McGee years later, which was a patent that she had released for $500.
The mere $500.
Yeah, which, I mean, could have been a lot back then.
Probably. During the 30s, right? Like, I feel like 500 is a lot.
Yeah. But the game was popularized because of this fellow named Charles Darrow, who was a piece of shit.
I just think the whole history of how Monopoly is made like charts a pretty interesting conversation about intellectual property and how our understanding of property has changed from the turn of the century to now, which like has to do a lot with how we think of wealth, like from the anti-landlord game into the glorification of landowning, which is like perfect American, not a perfect, but like it's the American history. A lot of
it is America.
Yeah,
this is quintessential America.
Okay, right. I think about how radical it was for her to create a game and see it transform into something totally different.
Literally the opposite thing. The thing
Right.
that she feared.
Yeah, totally.
It mutated into the exact thing she was warning us about.
We should find a copy and try to play it ourselves.
That would be fun. I think we could do more research and find it and then just recreate it ourselves, perhaps.
Right.
But ultimately, let's do it.
I think you can easily get a copy of Monopoly and change the rules and like play it in a
Change your costume.
Change it
maybe.
around.
Change it around.
Yeah, we'll definitely dig into it. If anybody wants to, maybe we can do it on a Patreon.
That would be cool.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah.
figure that out. We'll figure that out. Send us an email or a message if you want to participate in that. But what other games can you think about that kind of direct our attention to property and ownership in general?
Right. I'm immediately thinking about Catan, Settlers of Catan.
Yeah, the word settlers is in the fucking title.
Right. Like they all try to gamify the land, such as like the game that we played, El Dorado. You're playing as adventurers
Looking for treasure.
looking for treasure.
It's like Aztec, Mayan kind of imagery, which is
Indiana Jones.
which is colonialist.
a different kind of land and also different kinds of colonization.
Yeah.
There's a fucking
Looking for-
token in the game called The Native. Do you remember that?
No.
That was so...
I don't.
Like, you know, funny thing is, a lot of these games, they were called German games. They're actually written and produced in German originally, and then they somehow get translated into the North
Into
American.
different contexts.
So yeah, there's a lot of games called German strategic games about like walking around the land and also getting resources and trying to build your momentum throughout the game.
Yeah, but then like the people who make the board games use this
As a trope.
Yeah.
So there are like a lot of, I mean, within the board game, like
Community.
and culture in general, there's like a huge like discussion about like colonization and Orientalism.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the German games, they kind of like fetishize the Middle East specifically.
Yeah.
And like think of it as like
Everyone fetishizes the Middle East.
Yeah. You can fetishize me, but you gotta pay me though.
You gotta pay us through our Patreon. There's another. I went to a board game store a few years back. This was before the pandemic, and they had one game in the back called the Underground Railroad, and it was about teaching the children about slavery.
How?
So the whole game was you were a white person trying to eradicate slavery. I'm not going to go any further. It was also designed by a white high school teacher, a history high school teacher.
The worst thing is if they're trying to make it into a product and sell it.
Yeah. So this man did all the research about slavery and just commodified it into a board game so he could make
Money out of Black history.
about black trauma.
Trauma.
Trauma. Thank you, Jamie Lee.
Thank you, Jamie Lee. Shout out to Jamie Lee.
Yeah.
Friend of the pod.
Another game that comes to mind for me, Civilizations.
The name itself already
Oh
smells
yeah,
danger.
it's a computer game. It's like the same creators as The Sims and shit. And the whole idea behind that game is to basically start a civilization, but you can use any civilization. So they're the most recent iteration. You can use China. You can use
Egyptian.
You can use Egyptian. You can use Australian. You can use like literally everything.
Is there a civilization called white people?
They just call them France, England, Poland.
Anglo-Saxon and shit.
Yeah. But
can-
I think that concludes our segment on property, right?
Yeah, we would love to hear more about your personal feelings or stories about property, or if you disagree or agree with some of the things that we've said, we'd like to hear more what you think, and we can further our conversation forward.
Yeah. Yeah, but in the meantime, we are concluding the pod for this episode. Mm-hmm. So if you want to, you can mail in your housing-related stories. We would love to hear them. Send a message to our socials or on email at feelingmyoatspod@gmail.com. Make sure to subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcasts from. And we are also on YouTube. Mm-hmm. And if you really like what we are talking about, support a bitch by leaving a 5-star rating.
You have no choice.
You have no choice. And if you want to leave us a review, we would appreciate that wholeheartedly with arms wide open.
And my legs.
And my legs wide open.
You can also find us on Instagram at Feeling My Oats Pod and Twitter at Feeling My Oats PD. Yeah, like I said, if you like any of our conversation, you can also check us out on Patreon for exclusive content and faggy good fun.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just a reminder, you can find me on Twitch at feelingmyoats.ttv. And I'll be hosting sessions through gaming and conversations and sucking dick and cock.
Sucking dick and cock. Mm-hmm. You can also find me on Instagram at @JeffDunaway_ and Substack. Please remind me.substack.com. If you want to subscribe and have new piece of writing every Monday morning, just go hit that subscribe button. Thank you for listening to our steady decline into madness. In the meantime, thank you for listening to our faggy voices and opinions, and we hope you feel your oats today.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.